Deborah Ross didn't come to play, and Kash Patel felt it the second she leaned into the microphone. There was no pause, no warm-up, no polite detour, just a direct strike that froze the entire room. If you were watching, you could almost feel the temperature drop. Because what Ross unleashed in that moment wasn't political theater. It was a rare, razor-sharp confrontation aimed straight at the heart of federal power, and it left Patel with nowhere to hide. And before the first minute of that exchange was over,
I'm going a little out of order here because I'm going to pursue some of the things that you were just talking to Mr. Fry about and remind you about your confirmation hearing. At your confirmation hearing in January, you said under oath, and I quote, "There will be no politicization at the FBI. There will be no retributive actions taken by the FBI should I be confirmed." And in your written response to the Senate questionnaire, you said, I quote, "Personnel decisions shall be based on performance and adherence to the law. And every FBI employee will be held to the absolute same standard, and no one will be terminated for case assignments." So I want to just go through a couple scenarios with you to get a sense of whether you think these are examples of politicization of the FBI or making decisions based on the performance and adherence to the law. So, first question. Would hiring FBI agents, analysts, and supervisors from only one political party being politicization of the FBI or making personnel decisions based on performance and adherence to the law?
We don't ask FBI people, applicants, where their political parties are.
Mr. Patel, do you ask FBI applicants who they voted for?
The FBI does not.
Are you aware that in the lawsuit that Mr. Driscoll filed against you and the FBI, he was asked who he voted for?
Since that lawsuit has been filed and it's ongoing litigation, I'm not able to comment.
Well, but it also means that you just said that what happened in his situation didn't happen. So we will go on to the next question. Let me ask you an even easier one. Does firing agents for working on the cases that they were assigned to and that the president didn't like, is that politicization of the FBI or making personnel decisions based on performance and adherence to the law?
The FBI doesn't terminate anyone based on case assignments alone.
Has the FBI ever been sued by somebody who felt that they were terminated based on case assignments?
In the entire history of the FBI, I'm sure they have.
No, since your tenure.
I'm sure there's ongoing litigation.
Yes. In fact, there is ongoing litigation. And in fact, people have been asked who they voted for. And in fact, you are running an FBI for the President of the United States rather than the people of the United States, because my questions were not hypotheticals. They are the things you have done during your tenure. And according to a lawsuit filed last week by long-term FBI agents, you fired former acting director Brian Driscoll. He had served with the Bureau for nearly 20 years, earned a Medal of Honor, Medal of Valor for bravery during the dangerous ISIS raid, and had a wealth of crisis response experience and led the FBI's critical incident response group. When the Trump administrations interviewed Mr. Driscoll for that role, they interrogated him about his political leanings and who he voted for in the last 5 elections. Questions Mr. Driscoll refused to answer because those types of questions impermissibly politicized the FBI. You also fired Steve Jensen, who served the FBI for nearly 2 decades and ran critical terrorism, counterintelligence, and organized crime operations, whom you once described as embodying what the American public demands of the FBI. But he was fired because he took part in investigating crimes committed on January 6th. And Trump's MAGA base lambasted you online for keeping him at the FBI. so he's no longer at the FBI. You also fired a decorated combat veteran with decades of experience in the Bureau, Special Agent Walter Jardia, because he worked on the investigation into the Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election and helped investigate Trump's ally, Peter Navarro. Director Patel, it is very clear that you have flunked your own test. You've put saving your job, which I actually believe you were being honest about during your confirmation hearings, over doing what's right for the FBI and the American people. That is not adherence to the law. Thank you, and I yield back.
Time of the gentleladies.
It became clear this wasn't going to be one of those forgettable hearings filled with rehearsed lines and careful evasions. This was something different, something explosive. She started by doing what almost no one in Washington ever does. She held Patel to his own words. The promises he made under oath. The commitments he repeated with confidence. The picture he painted of himself as a leader who wouldn't bend the FBI to anyone's political will. And while Patel may have expected those vows to fade into the background, Ross pulled them out like receipts. It was the moment she began dismantling the version of himself he'd spent months selling. And the more she laid out, the more the room felt like it was witnessing something it wasn't supposed to see, because Ross wasn't guessing. She wasn't speculating. She walked in with documented cases, official grievances, and testimonies from people who had spent decades inside the Bureau. She showed Patel how his own decisions contradicted nearly every promise he made during his confirmation. She reminded him, and everyone watching, that power comes with responsibility, and that the uniform he oversees isn't meant to serve the occupant of the Oval Office, but the American people. That was the moment the hearing shifted. You could see it in Patel's face, a tightening jaw, eyes darting, answers shortening. He knew what was coming next, but he couldn't stop it. Ross dug immediately into the first case, one that many people outside the intelligence world had never heard about. Brian Driscoll, nearly 20 years at the Bureau, Medal of Valor for bravery, trusted with crisis-level operations. A figure respected across political lines. But according to his lawsuit and internal accounts, his interview for a major leadership role took a disturbing turn. Reports claim he was asked about his political leanings, who he voted for, whether he aligned with the right side. These weren't questions meant to assess competence. They were questions meant to test loyalty, political loyalty. And Driscoll refused to answer, not out of defiance, but principle. Because an FBI agent swearing allegiance to any political party is the very definition of compromised law enforcement. Ross recounted this calmly, but the weight behind her words was crushing. She wasn't reading rumors. She was reading allegations from sworn filings. She was pointing to the dangerous line Patel had crossed, or at least appeared to. And the minute Patel tried to dismiss it, Ross hit him with something even harder. If the Bureau truly never asked political questions, why was Driscoll's lawsuit full of them? Why did sworn testimony contradict Patel's own denial? Every answer Patel tried to give only dug the hole deeper. Every moment he dodged, every time he hid behind, "I can't comment on ongoing litigation." The contrast became clearer. Ross was prepared. Patel wasn't, but she wasn't done. Not even close. She brought up Steve Jensen next. Nearly 20 years of service. A man she herself said exemplified what Americans expect from the Bureau: dedication, courage, and integrity. Yet he was fired. Why? Because he worked cases tied to January 6th. Because he participated in investigations the political base didn't like. And online, partisan activists targeted him relentlessly for it. Rumors circulated that Patel was feeling pressure to remove anyone involved in politically sensitive probes. Ross didn't frame those rumors as fact. She explicitly framed them as what the public had been saying. But when that online pressure campaign ended with Jensen's termination, she didn't need to exaggerate anything. The timeline spoke for itself. Jensen wasn't the only one. Ross then highlighted Walter Jardina, a decorated combat veteran who spent decades with the Bureau. His involvement in the Russia interference investigation and in cases involving high-profile political figures reportedly put him on the wrong side of the internal power shift. Accusations surfaced that he was pushed out not because of misconduct or failure, but because he worked on cases certain political circles wanted to bury. Ross laid this out with precision, making it clear these weren't isolated decisions. They formed a pattern. a pattern that looked less like law enforcement and more like political enforcement. That's when the hearing took on a completely different tone. It wasn't about one agent or one firing. It became a broader indictment of what happens when one of the nation's most powerful institutions starts bending toward one political direction. Ross didn't sensationalize it. She didn't need to. The facts, the documents, the lawsuits, they created a picture that was already disturbing. And when she said these people weren't fired for incompetence, but for doing their jobs, the room seemed to hold its breath. Throughout all of this, Patel tried to maintain control. He repeated that the Bureau doesn't terminate people based on case assignments. He insisted political questions aren't part of the hiring process. But Ross kept showing example after example where those claims simply didn't match what was happening. Each time he said, "The FBI does not do that," she countered with sworn statements saying otherwise. And slowly, Patel's answers started shrinking into one phrase: "I cannot comment on ongoing litigation." It became his shield, and Ross treated it like paper. The more he ducked, the more she pressed. The more he relied on vague legal excuses, the more she made the contradiction obvious. She pointed out that he claimed the Bureau never asked political questions, while Driscoll's lawsuit said it did. She noted that he insisted people weren't fired for case assignments, even though multiple lawsuits and statements alleged exactly that. By the time she finished, Patel wasn't defending policy anymore. He was defending himself from his own record. And that's what made this such a unique moment. In Washington, officials usually stay vague enough to avoid ever being directly contradicted. They play careful, soft, calculated. But Patel had spoken too confidently during his confirmation. He made promises too absolute. And Ross brought every one of those promises back to the table like a stack of receipts. It was a confrontation that felt almost symbolic, the elected official reminding the unelected one that power does not exist without accountability. But Ross didn't stop at the internal politics. She zoomed out to the bigger picture, the one most people outside government rarely see. She explained why an FBI losing its independence is an existential threat to democracy. The Bureau was built to be insulated from political pressure. The moment that insulation cracks, the moment party loyalty begins influencing hiring or firing, the very foundation of justice starts to crumble. And she said that plainly. Because if FBI agents fear losing their jobs for investigating the wrong person, then justice becomes selective, conditional, negotiable. Ross spelled out exactly what that means for ordinary people. If someone inside the FBI can't tell the truth without risking their career, then who can? If decorated veterans can be punished for working politically inconvenient cases, what does that say about the integrity of future investigations? It's a chilling idea, and she delivered it without raising her voice. That calmness made it even more powerful. Because she wasn't performing. She was warning that that's when the exchange took on a deeper meaning. It wasn't just about Patel. It wasn't just about individual agents or individual firings. Ross was exposing a dangerous shift inside institutions meant to remain above politics. She was showing how the edges of democracy fray, not with dramatic collapses, but with quiet internal decisions no one sees. A hiring question here, a firing there, one agent removed, another pressured. Over time, the system bends. And once it bends far enough, it may never snap back. Patel's silence on the hardest questions only amplified the urgency behind her words. Because when someone has nothing to hide, they answer. When they hesitate, when they rely on technicalities or endless, "I can't comment," it makes people wonder what the truth actually is. And in this case, the truth seemed obvious even without Patel admitting it. Promises had been broken, independence breached, and the people who paid the price were the ones who dared to do their jobs. That's why the confrontation resonated far beyond that room. It wasn't just political insiders who noticed it. It spread online, across social media, through communities who rarely pay attention to congressional hearings. People reacted not because of the politics, but because of the principle. When institutions that are supposed to protect the country begin serving individuals or factions instead, the entire system becomes vulnerable. And Ross made that point with clinical clarity. By the final moments of her questioning, Patel wasn't debating her anymore. He was absorbing the reality of having his own record turned against him. Ross told him directly. He wasn't doing what he promised. He wasn't upholding the standards he swore he would. And most of all, He wasn't putting the American people above internal loyalty games. It was a blunt, stunning conclusion, and it landed because everything she said before it built to that point naturally. And then she ended her time with a line that will likely be quoted for years. "You have flunked your own test." For a leader of the FBI, the institution charged with protecting national security, constitutional rights, and public trust, there may be no harsher indictment. She didn't accuse him of anything illegal. She didn't attack him personally. She attacked the gap between what he promised and what he delivered. And in politics, that gap is often where the truth lives. That be why the time the hearing moved on, the significance of what had happened was sinking in. This wasn't a partisan ambush. It wasn't a stunt. It was a rare moment where someone in Congress used their power to hold one of the country's most powerful figures accountable. It reminded everyone watching that institutions don't stay strong by themselves. They stay strong when people inside those institutions are willing to confront the cracks. And that's where this story hits hardest. Because the truth is, public trust in federal agencies has been eroding for years. People feel disconnected from the systems meant to serve them. They question whether justice is still impartial. They worry that truth depends on who holds influence. That's why Ross's confrontation mattered so profoundly. It pushed back against that erosion. It was someone saying, "This isn't how it's supposed to work," and refusing to let the moment pass quietly. Oh, now the question falls to us. What do we do with this moment? Do we ignore it? Do we pretend this kind of politicization isn't dangerous? Or do we acknowledge that accountability is never optional? Not for Congress, not for federal agents, and certainly not for the person leading the FBI. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you believe Patel drifted the Bureau toward political loyalty? Or do you think this is being blown out of proportion? And if you want to keep following stories like this, stories that actually shine a light on what's happening behind the curtain, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. This conversation is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what comes next.